I'm a fool who thought he could do it all alone.
Being lost isn't the end, my friend. Sometimes it's where the real journey begins.
In the rugged hills beyond Bethlehem, where the rocky terrain stretched endlessly under the pale blue sky, lived a shepherd named Joram. He was 28 years old, his face bronzed by years under the sun, his hands rough from gripping his staff and tending sheep across the wilderness. Joram had been a shepherd since childhood, following in the footsteps of his father, Matthias, who had tended flocks before him. The work was solitary and hard, filled with long nights watching over the sheep, protecting them from wolves and thieves, and guiding them to water and pasture. Joram knew every stone, every ravine, every hidden spring in those hills. But for all his knowledge of the land, he felt lost in his own life, as if he were walking a path that led nowhere. His father had died 3 years earlier, gored by a wild boar while defending the flock, and Joram had inherited not only the sheep, but also the weight of responsibility for his mother, Leah, and his 2 younger sisters, Miriam and Esther. The girls were of marrying age, but dowries required money, and the flock was small. Joram worked from dawn until dusk, sometimes sleeping under the stars with only his cloak for warmth, but it never seemed enough. The sheep multiplied slowly. Illness took some, and predators claimed others. Joram felt as though he were walking in circles, always moving, but never arriving. His mother would say, "God will provide, Joram. Trust in him." But Joram's faith had grown as weathered as his hands. Where was God when his father died? Where was he when the rains failed and the pastures withered? Joram believed in God, but he no longer believed God cared about shepherds like him. It was the spring of 30 AD, and the hills were alive with whispers of a new teacher who walked the land. Travelers passing through spoke of a man named Jesus from Nazareth, a rabbi who performed miracles and spoke of a kingdom where the lost would be found and the weary given rest. Joram heard the stories while selling wool in Bethlehem's market, where merchants and beggars alike buzzed with talk of this Jesus. Some said he had healed a paralyzed man in Capernaum. Others claimed he had fed thousands with a few loaves and fish. Joram listened but said nothing. Miracles were for the desperate, he thought, and he was too proud to count himself among them. He had his staff, his sheep, and his strength. That was enough, or so he told himself. One afternoon, as Joram led his flock along a narrow path carved into the hillside, one of his sheep, a stubborn ewe he called Tirzah, wandered off the trail. Joram cursed under his breath and scrambled after her, his staff in hand. Tirzah had always been difficult, straying whenever she pleased, but she was also one of his best ewes, strong and fertile. He couldn't afford to lose her. The terrain grew steeper, the rocks loosed beneath his feet, and Joram's frustration mounted. "Tirzah!" he shouted, his voice echoing off the hills. "Come back, you fool!" But the ewe kept moving, her bleating faint and defiant. Joram chased her deeper into the wilderness, away from the flock, until the sun began to sink and the shadows lengthened. Finally, he cornered her near a cliff edge, but as he reached for her, his foot slipped. He fell hard, rolling down a rocky slope, his staff clattering away. Pain shot through his leg, sharp and unforgiving. When he stopped, he lay on his back, staring at the darkening sky, his breath ragged. He tried to stand, but his ankle wouldn't bear weight. It was swollen and throbbing. Tirzah stood a few feet away, chewing grass, utterly indifferent to his plight. Joram wanted to laugh, but the sound that came out was closer to a sob. Here he was, a shepherd who knew every inch of these hills, and he was lost, injured, with night falling fast. If you've ever felt completely lost, like Joram lying on that hillside, hit that like button right now. And drop the word path in the comments if you're with me. Let's see where this story takes us together. The night was cold, and Joram's leg ached with every heartbeat. He dragged himself to a sheltered spot beneath an outcropping of rock, pulling his cloak tight around his shoulders. Tirza settled nearby, her presence somehow comforting, despite her role in his misfortune. Joram thought of his mother, who would be worrying by now, and of Miriam and Esther, who depended on him. He thought of the flock scattered on the hillside without their shepherd. Shame washed over him, hot and bitter. What kind of shepherd loses himself? As the stars appeared one by one, Joram prayed, though he wasn't sure to whom. God, if you're there, if you care about shepherds like me, help me find my way. His voice was small, swallowed by the vastness of the night. He didn't expect an answer, but speaking the words brought a strange relief, as if he'd set down a burden he'd been carrying for years. He dozed fitfully, waking often to the sounds of the wilderness, the howl of a distant jackal, the rustle of wind through the scrub. When dawn finally broke, pale and tentative, Joram tried again to stand. His ankle was worse, the swelling angry and hot. He fashioned a crude crutch from a broken branch and began to hobble, calling for Tirza, who followed reluctantly. Progress was slow, agonizing, and Joram had no idea which direction would lead him home. The hills all looked the same now, the familiar landmarks obscured by pain and exhaustion. By midday he was out of water, his lips cracked, his head pounding. He sat down on a flat rock, his crutch beside him, and closed his eyes. I'm a fool who thought he could do it all alone. Then, faint but clear, he heard voices. Joram's eyes snapped open. He strained to listen. Yes, voices. Men, talking and laughing. He struggled to his feet and called out, his voice cracked and hoarse. Here! I'm here! A moment later, 3 figures appeared over a rise. They were travelers, dusty and road-worn, with staffs and simple tunics. One of them, a man with a kind face and steady eyes, hurried forward. Brother, are you hurt? Joram nodded, too relieved to speak. The man called to his companions, and together they helped Joram sit. One of them offered a water skin, and Joram drank deeply, the cool liquid a gift beyond measure. What happened? The kind-faced man asked. Joram explained, his words tumbling out. The lost sheep, the fall, the night alone. The men listened, their expressions sympathetic. You're a shepherd, one of them said, not a question, but a statement. Joram nodded. Not a very good one, it seems. The kind-faced man smiled gently. A good shepherd doesn't abandon his sheep, even when it costs him. You went after the one that was lost. That's what matters. Joram frowned. But I failed. I couldn't bring her back, and now I'm lost too. The man's smile deepened. Being lost isn't the end, my friend. Sometimes it's where the real journey begins. The words struck Joram oddly, as if they carried a weight beyond their surface. He looked at the man more closely. There was something about him, a calmness, a light in his eyes that seemed to see past Joram's dusty, broken exterior. Who are you? Joram asked. Before the man could answer, one of his companions said, This is Jesus, from Nazareth. We're traveling to Jerusalem. Joram's breath caught. Jesus, the teacher everyone spoke of, the miracle worker. And here he was, standing in the wilderness, helping a failed shepherd. I've heard of you, Joram said, his voice barely above a whisper. They say you perform miracles. Jesus knelt beside him, his gaze steady and warm. "Do you believe in miracles, Joram?" Joram hesitated. "I don't know. I used to believe in a lot of things." Jesus nodded. "Faith is like a path, Joram. Sometimes we lose our way, but that doesn't mean the path isn't there."
Jesus and his companions helped Joram to his feet, supporting him as they walked. They retrieved Tirzah, who followed docilely now, and began the slow journey back toward Bethlehem. As they walked, Jesus spoke, his words simple yet profound. He told stories, parables he called them, about lost sheep and good shepherds, about a father who welcomed home a wayward son, about a kingdom where the last would be first. Joram listened, his pain fading into the background as the words sank into his heart. When Jesus spoke of the shepherd who left 99 sheep to find the one that was lost, Joram felt tears prick his eyes. "That's me," he said quietly. "I'm the lost sheep." Jesus looked at him, and in that moment Joram felt truly seen, not as a failure or a burden, but as someone worth seeking. "You are," Jesus said gently, "and you've been found." By the time they reached the outskirts of Bethlehem, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Joram's mother and sisters ran to meet him, their faces a mixture of relief and joy. Leah embraced him, tears streaming down her cheeks. "We thought we'd lost you," she cried. Joram held her tightly. "I was lost, Mother, but I've been found." He turned to thank Jesus, but the teacher and his companions were already moving on, their figures silhouetted against the sunset. Joram called out, "Teacher, how can I repay you?" Jesus paused and looked back, a smile on his lips. "Follow the path, Joram, and when you find others who are lost, help them find their way." Then he was gone, swallowed by the gathering dusk. Joram stood there, leaning on his makeshift crutch, Tirzah at his side, and felt something shift within him, a lightness, a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. The weeks that followed were transformative for Joram. His ankle healed slowly, but his spirit healed faster. He returned to his flock with a new perspective, seeing each sheep not as a burden, but as a trust, a life placed in his care. He no longer resented the long nights or the hard work. Instead, he found joy in the quiet moments, in the bleating of the lambs, in the feel of the wind on his face. He began to teach Levi, a neighbor boy, the ways of shepherding, passing on not just the skills, but the heart of it, the patience, the vigilance, the love for creatures that couldn't fend for themselves. He spoke often of Jesus, of the encounter in the wilderness, and word spread through Bethlehem. People began to come to Joram, asking about the teacher from Nazareth. Some were skeptical, others curious, but Joram shared what he knew, the stories Jesus had told, the way he had looked at a broken shepherd and seen someone worth saving. One evening, as Joram sat on a hillside, watching his flock graze under the stars, Leah came to him, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders. She sat beside him, her presence a comfort. "You've changed, my son," she said softly. Joram nodded. "I was lost, Mother, but he found me. And now I see, being lost wasn't the worst thing. The worst thing would have been staying lost and never knowing there was a way home." Leah smiled, tears glistening in the starlight. "Your father would be proud." Months passed, and news reached Bethlehem that Jesus had been arrested in Jerusalem, tried and crucified. Joram heard the news while in the market, and his heart broke. He thought of the man who had knelt beside him in the wilderness, who had called him by name, who had spoken of paths and found sheep. How could such a man be gone? He returned to his flock, grief weighing heavy, and knelt on the hillside, his face in his hands. "Why, God? Why take the one who showed us the way?" But even as he spoke, he felt a strange peace, a quiet certainty that the path Jesus had spoken of wasn't ended, it was just beginning. 3 days later, rumors began to spread, wild, impossible rumors. Some said Jesus had risen from the dead, that his tomb was empty, that he had been seen by his followers. Joram didn't know what to believe, but he remembered Jesus' words. Being lost isn't the end. It's where the real journey begins. Whether the rumors were true or not, Joram knew one thing: Jesus had changed him, had shown him that being a shepherd wasn't just about tending sheep. It was about loving them, seeking them, never giving up on even the most stubborn and wayward. And if that was true for sheep, how much more for people? Joram became known in Bethlehem as the shepherd who cared, not just for his flock, but for anyone who was lost. He would sit in the market and tell stories, his voice quiet but compelling, about a teacher who had walked the wilderness and found a broken man. He spoke of paths and purpose, of being lost and being found, and slowly people began to listen. Some dismissed him as a dreamer, but others felt the truth in his words, the echo of something greater than themselves. Years later, when Joram was an old man, his hair silver, his hands gnarled but still strong, he would sit with his grandchildren and tell them the story of the day he was lost in the wilderness and the teacher who found him. He would show them the scar on his ankle, faded but still there, and say, "This is my reminder. We all lose our way sometimes, but there's always a path back, and there's always someone willing to walk with us." And in the quiet of those moments, as the fire crackled and the stars shone overhead, Joram would close his eyes and hear again the voice of Jesus, gentle and sure. Follow the path, Joram, and when you find others who are lost, help them find their way. All right, if this story touched your heart, you know what to do. Smash that like button, drop Shepherd in the comments so I know you made it this far, and subscribe for more powerful biblical stories every single week. Share this with someone who feels lost right now. They need to hear that they can be found. I'll see you in the next story. Grace and peace, my friends.